I think I'm Kenneth Colson, I'm an alcoholic. And I think if we were on Central Time, I'd be nice and early and have time to get a cup of coffee or something before the meeting started. And I think one of the greatest things in Alcoholics Anonymous is hearing that earnestness, the gratitude that we feel when we feel our lives have been touched and have been changed by this program. And that's what I heard. That's what I just walked in on. And to me, that speaks volumes for what a strong group this is, and just for the awesomeness of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I'm glad to be here, and I think it should be the duty of any speaker, if you're ever asked to speak, make sure you're clear on what time the meeting starts. So if there's any blame to be passed around, by all means, blame the guy from out of town, because Taylor has to actually live here. And I just want to say I should have asked to make sure that I was clear on what time the meeting started. But I am an alcoholic, and by the grace of God and the program of Alcoholics Anonymous, I haven't had a drink since June 2nd of the year 2000. So that's June 2nd is when I pick up my chips and things. I know some people say you have to wait till the next day. So if you're one of those people, you can always sort of discount my times. You only count me as being sober since June 3rd. Or if one of those people say it doesn't actually count, no Tom's one of these people, you have to actually not only have stopped drinking, but actually have met with someone in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I didn't actually speak with someone from Alcoholics Anonymous until the 4th. So you can count it that way if that makes you feel better. Yeah, June 4th. Or if you want to say it doesn't count until you picked up a white chip, then I've never got a white chip, so perhaps I'm not sober. I don't know. But I think there's anytime I speak, that's the thing that I try to convey is my love of Alcoholics Anonymous and the transformation that I've experienced in my life because of it. I can tell you my story is much like any story that I've heard in Alcoholics Anonymous. When I hear speaker meetings, everyone's got sort of their own thing, their own shtick, their own particulars. But what I see is sort of a common thread is somehow growing up, I always say growing up feeling weird and different. Some people say I didn't feel weird and different. I just felt like life wasn't good enough for me. But however it is, but somehow something's missing. We find alcohol. Alcohol makes it all better. And then at some point alcohol turns on us. And then we end up crashing and burning, which can take a variety of different forms. And then we somehow make it in Alcoholics Anonymous. And that's my story. Very briefly, I was born in Ashboro, grew up in Willmington, and my particular little thing that had going on that helped me feel weird and different was being diagnosed with a learning disability at a young age. And so I was always like the LD kid, and I had trouble with writing and had to have tutors and stuff like that. And so that was just a little chip that I had on my shoulder. I'd been training from a young age. Every school year, every class I was in, I always go up to the teacher on the first day of school. Every teacher explained to me I have a learning disability, I have trouble with writing, blah, blah, blah. And so it just sort of became part of my thing. And of course, the way that was interpreted to me, particularly by my mother, my understanding of her interpretation of what the educational specialist was telling her is that basically I'm a genius. I have super high IQ, smarter than anybody else in the room. But no one will ever be able to appreciate it because my brain works differently, and so I'm always going to get bad grades. I'm always going to mess up. But no matter how bad I mess up, I'm actually smarter than you. And of course, it went until years later I came to Alcoholics Anonymous, so I found out that's the way all alcoholics feel. I just had people with PhDs, conveying this. But so that was sort of my shtick. I was weird and different, and that was just the way I decided I think I went through a phase in middle school of trying to fit in, and it didn't work out, so I just went the other way. And so, I'm going to be the strangest person you've ever met. And that was just sort of my shtick. I didn't know at the time that I was creating a shtick, but from my perspective now, that's what I was doing. And I struggled with the first step. Early on, I swore off alcohol forever. I mean, forever. I was never, ever, ever going to drink again. For the first time, when I was 15, and I lost my virginity to a much older woman. She was, I guess, in her 20s or something. I don't really know. On somebody's front porch in downtown Willmington at a party that we were at. And there's this guy named Sam. We thought he was really cool because, basically he supplied us with alcohol. I look back on it now, and he was like a 30-year-old man who still lived with his mom and bought liquor for high school kids in order to have somebody to hang out with. So it actually sounds kind of creepy. But, and it was one of those things, and I often tell that story. It's one of those things that, in the interest of time, I'm giving you the short version. But that's one of the things I thought I was going to go to the grave with that. And it was the most horrific thing. I was convinced it was the 80s. I was sure everybody was talking about HIV and stuff. I was like, I'm going to die of AIDS, and then my family's going to be ashamed of me, and all this stuff. And by the grace of God, that didn't happen. And I didn't drink again, or be with a woman again until I got in college. Of course, my freshman year of college, I hadn't had a drink in a year and a half or so. And as soon as I show up, my roommate comes in. He's got a fake ID. He's like, I'm going to go down to the store and buy some beer. And I hadn't had a drink in a year and a half, and without even thinking about it, I just reached in my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and just handed him all the money I had. And he said, well, what do you want? And I'm like, well, I don't know, just get a lot of it, as much as it'll buy. And so, I met everybody my freshman year. I was at 5 o'clock, people were still moving in with their parents and stuff, and I was, passed out in the bathroom next to a puke-covered toilet. And that's what everybody knew. And I wondered why they thought I was so crazy. But swore off alcohol for the second time. I was still in college. It was still before I was 21. I got my first DWI. And I was quite horrified with myself and embarrassed. And again, I made it for over a year and a half or more without drinking. That time, that was the time without a solemn oath. But I always like to make this as a public service announcement. I believe in AA singles with purpose, and for me, this is not an outside issue. I really made a conscious decision to try to control. I realized I was an alcoholic, and I was going to control it with pot and pills. And needless to say, that did not work, because while I made it for over a year without drinking, eventually the drink came back, but the other stuff didn't necessarily go away. And so then I was really messed up. And finally, my family sent me off to rehab in 2000, January of 2000. And I did a 28-day program. I've been living in Greensboro, got out of rehab, went back to Willmington. Was going to get all away from everybody that, all those people who had been getting me in trouble. And, I decided to join AA. When I got that DWI, I had to go to a program where they had taken us to a couple of AA meetings, so I'd at least seen some AA meetings before. And I had a grandfather, my mother's father, had gotten sober in Alcoholics Anonymous up in Roanoke, Virginia in 1950. Unfortunately, he died before I got sober, but I'd heard about alcoholism my whole life. I'd heard it ran in families, I heard it ran in my family, I'd heard of Alcoholics Anonymous, but this is my first effort to do anything about it. So I was in Wilmington, and I joined a young people's group, because I was only 25. And I would go devoutly every week, except for the weeks when I just didn't really feel like it. And there's this girl from Myrtle Beach who I was coming out of my home group. It was the young people's group, and I'm coming out of the home group one night, and she pulled me aside, and she said, I didn't really even know her that well. She said, Ken, I'm not trying to tell you how to live your life or how to work your program, but you're doing everything necessary to relapse, and I just feel like I have to say something to you about it. And I was offended, and I told her what I thought of that, and I was like, I'm coming out of my home group right now, and I've got a sponsor, and all of a sudden she's like, well, you hardly ever come to this meeting, and really you should probably go to some other meetings as well. You should probably go to a meeting every night, and I know your sponsor is, and I know you don't really call them, and of course I was mad. I was like, hey, I know I've called them at least twice. And so I showed her, I had not only did I call them, I called them twice. But sure enough, within 2 weeks of that, I was drinking. And ended up going down to Myrtle Beach. I was going to go to a spiritual retreat for the weekend. And I'd only relapsed for a week. Actually, it had only been 6 days that day. Started on a Saturday night, and this was a Friday afternoon. And I was doing this little trick while I was driving down 17 going to Myrtle Beach. through Brunswick County, and I was drinking. I was in the 40s. That was my thing. So I always figured, if I'm going to get smashed, why pay a lot of money? So I, driving along, I do this trick where I kind of look both ways, and then if there's no other cars around, chug as much as I could, and then, put my bottle back down. And I don't even really remember getting to Myrtle Beach. Last time I remember, it was sometime that afternoon. I was on my way down there. And then the next thing I remember, I come to, and I'm strapped to this thing, and I'm on this board, and it's moving, it goes zzz, and now I start hearing all these weird noises, and I start looking around, and I hear this voice go, "Don't move, you're going to mess up the scan." And I'm like, oh my God, I'm being scanned. And I was actually in a CAT scan machine, which is one of the most interesting places to come out of a blackout. And it was actually Saturday evening, and I missed a whole 24 hours. And turns out, according to police reports and medical reports and things, I was somewhere at 9:30, 10 o'clock that night, which I don't even remember the sun setting that day. I was in Myrtle Beach on Highway 17, North Myrtle Beach, and driving at highway speeds, whatever that means, and just swerved into oncoming traffic. And a couple ladies who were just minding their own business, driving in the opposite direction, just had some crazy person swerve into them and just crash into them head on. Fortunately, they were in some kind of SUV. I was in a little compact car. And purely by the grace of God, and I've heard Tom's story. Come out of blackouts and, find out you hit somebody, and it's just whatever happened. I have no memory of it. But apparently they walked away from the accident. It took about 20 minutes to extract me from the vehicle, according to reports I've read. And apparently when I first got to the hospital, I was totally incoherent, but sometime during the day on Saturday, which I don't even remember, a doctor came and talked to me, and I told him I was from Willmington, and told him that I used to have a drinking problem, but hadn't had anything to drink for some time. According to the blood reports, my blood alcohol is like a 0.31, which is potentially fatal dose. Once you're in the 30s. But even a blackout, I was lying about my drinking. And my mom came, and she was, it took a couple days. Actually, before she got there, they sent me back to Willmington, which I found out later I was in trouble for fleeing the jurisdiction because I was under arrest. But of course, I didn't realize that. They stuck me in an ambulance. There's an orthopedic. I had shattered the bones in my leg, and needed surgery to put it all back together. So there's an orthopedic center in Wilmington, and I was from there, so they just shipped me off. And I didn't really know what was going on, but the priest from the church that I'd grown up in, I hadn't been at church forever, but he called me in the hospital. Someone from the family had talked to him, and he asked me if I'd like to have a visitor, and I said sure. But he didn't say that he would come himself. He did something that was much, much better than that. He told me there was a member of the congregation who had disclosed to him that this man was a member of Alcoholics Anonymous, and would I like to have a member of Alcoholics Anonymous come talk to me? And I said yes, and so he did. And so that was as best I recall, June 4th, 2 days after my accident. Then a couple days later, my mom came, and she gave me this little Al-Anon speech, which included such things as, I don't know where you're going to go when you get out of the hospital, but you're not going to my house. And I know that was one of the most difficult things she ever had to say her whole life. Both her parents had been alcoholics. Her father had gotten sober, and her mother finally drank herself to death in the mid-'80s. And both her brothers had been alcoholics. She married my father, who was an alcoholic. In fact, he's probably drunk right now down in Florida. And she had pooled, I don't even know how much money they had spent trying to send me to rehab and everything else. And she had done everything she knew to do to try to save me from this disease, because she knew what it would do. And she had reached a point, she said, I can't do anymore. If you're going to do anything better, you're going to have to do it yourself. And I cried, and I said, Mom, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. I know that I've upset you. And she said, don't tell me you're sorry. I know you're sorry. Sorry doesn't mean shit. And I hate to use strong language, but that was her exact words. I remember it very, very clearly. And she said, if you want to tell me something that would mean something, tell me you haven't had a drink in 5 years. And, I was in a hospital gown with, tubes coming out of me and stuff. I didn't have a back pocket, much less could I reach back and pull out 5 years of sobriety. But I tell you, when I got my 5-year medallion, it was at a noon meeting at that time. My home group is high noon in Willmington. My home group now, by the way, is Inside Out, Saturdays at 6 o'clock. So I'm used to meetings that are not necessarily 8 o'clock, but 6 o'clock meeting in Wilmington on Saturdays. But that time it was high noon, which is Tuesdays and Thursdays at noon. And so I got my 5-year medallion. I drove straight from that meeting to my mom's house. And I walked in, and she was in the kitchen doing something, and I came in and I showed her my medallion and told her what it was. And she burst into tears, and I cried, and she cried, and we hugged, and it was really, really a beautiful moment. And I think the take-home message from that little vignette is, it took 5 years, 5 hard years of busting my tail going to meetings. And I gotta say, when I was in the hospital, that hospital room back in Wilmington, somebody came to talk to me. I still didn't really believe that AA would work for me. What I felt, thanks to that girl who had pulled me aside. And by the way, I saw her, she works at as of, I don't know, I guess it was 3 or 4 years ago, I found her down in Myrtle Beach, and she's still sober, going to meetings and stuff. And she was working at a bookstore, and I told her about that and what an impact that had on me. She remembered me, but she had no memory of that conversation at all. But I think that in a way that really saved me, because when I came to and the CAT scan machine and all that and was in the hospital, I knew it absolutely was not the case that I'd come to Alcoholics Anonymous and Alcoholics Anonymous had failed me. I knew that I had not done the deal. And because of that, I really kind of felt like it was my fault that I'd relapsed and gotten drunk again, because I hadn't really done the program. And truly my motivation early on, or besides the fact that no one else wanted to talk to me or deal with me, my idea was, well, if I get drunk again, it's going to be your fault, because I'm going to do everything you people tell me. So if it doesn't work, and it turns out in Alcoholics Anonymous, our motivation really doesn't matter that much, and how we think that, what we think doesn't really matter that much, and how we feel doesn't matter that much. It's what we do that really counts, and everything else counts only in terms of the extent to which it's motivation for action. And that was my motivation. And when I finally got back, I had an old high school friend put me up for a couple weeks until I had a shattered leg and no car in the second floor apartment, and it was a mess. But once I got back in my apartment, I called the intergroup office and told my situation. They said they have some guys come out and see me, and these two guys, a guy named Howard and his sponsee Patrick, came out. And I can only imagine how terrible it was in there. One thing, I smoked at the time, and my ashtray was an old shoebox that I'd lined with aluminum foil, and it would just be inches deep. I had nothing to do but just lie around. And that was the thing, I would call people and ask them, beg them to bring me cigarettes. And again, not to be crude, but literally at the time when I first got there, I was having to use one of those little urinal things you have to do. And these guys are coming on a 12-step call, and I'm like, hey, could you go dump this out for me? And you can only imagine, bathing was kind of out, housekeeping. I mean, it was a nasty, when I think of, and I've heard them since, I've heard these guys tell their version of this, and yes, they were disgusted. And I felt disgusting on the inside, and I looked disgusting on the outside, and I don't even want to know what the place smelled like. But they came and they sat there, and they read to me out of the big book. And they told me about their own experience with alcohol. And they were two surfer dudes. They were older than me, but they were surfer dudes. And they were in some kind of city league for playing tennis and, competitively and stuff. And, I'm extremely just kind of uncoordinated and non-athletic. And they made fun of me because I had books there where I was, in high school parlance, I was a nerd, because I had this learning disability and always had to prove how smart I was because I was about to flunk out of school all the time. And, they were sort of, more the jock kind of guys. But man, I was so happy to have them there. And I had a college degree, and quite literate, liked to read, And, last thing in the world I needed somebody to sit there and read to me like I'm illiterate. But at that point in my life, what I needed more than anything else was for those two guys to come and sit in my apartment and read to me. And they read Bill's story and There Is a Solution and more about alcoholism. Just the basics of our program. And they actually started a little men's big book study in my apartment that went on for 2-3 months until I could get out and go to meetings every Wednesday night. They kind of got to the point there's like 10, 12 guys coming. I was just like their little AA project or something. But I haven't had a drink since. That's those guys. That's what they taught me. And then when I finally got to meetings, I met my sponsor. There's this guy named Tom, and he's been sober, I guess 25 years now. He'll pick up 26. No, he just picked up 26 years. But he's this old Irish Catholic from New Jersey, and he's not real into flowery language or discussing feelings a whole lot. But you know what he taught me? He taught me love, and not just the idea of love. Because it's not like he talked about it; he did it. He showed me time, and for me, time is love. And I felt so worthless and so unworthy of anybody's time or effort. It blew me away that he'd pick me up every Sunday night and take me up to Pender County, up to Burgaw or Rocky Point to where his sponsor was, and found out there are things called grand sponsors. And we drive down downtown Willmington, go by a halfway house on the way, and ask him, and I was like, well, that's great. We're helping these poor guys, needy guys. Meanwhile, I'm on crutches. I was on crutches for like 6 months. And, these guys could like walk and work and hold jobs and stuff. They live in a halfway house, but they were doing better than I was. And then go 20 minutes up the road to Rocky Point, and we still get there by 7:15 or so, and for an 8 o'clock meeting. But we have had time to hang out and talk and stuff before the meeting, and then we have the meeting. Then we have 20 minutes on the ride home to talk about it and stuff. And then every Monday, he'd take me to a meeting. Tuesday and Thursday was his home group, which then became my home group. And every Wednesday, he'd take me to have lunch with his sponsor. And I still have, it's breakfast, and it's some slightly different. My grand sponsor doesn't come down anymore because he's having some health problems. But I've had a meal almost every week for the past 13 years with my sponsor. And it's just that kind of dedication. And he's one of these guys that he'd have a home group, and he'd be there every single time the doors were open, usually an hour early, making coffee, setting up, and just quietly doing it and reaching out to people. And he gave me rides for 3.5 years. I didn't have a car. And then when I got a car, it was really weird because I felt awkward even like driving myself to a meet. Like it seemed like some kind of betrayal. So I was so used to going with him. And I was going to other meetings too. And that was a great blessing I had early on, was not having a car, because I'm not good at asking for help, and I'm still not really good at making small talk. And not having a car forced me to do that. But between the experience of having those guys come and talk to me, having the experience I have with my sponsor and continue to have my sponsor, that got me started on this transformation of just seeing the world differently. And truly, the only world that I get to inhabit is the world of my perception. And I spent years of my life just, as a kid, grew up angry and resentful at the world all the time. When I was in high school, every kind of time I got a chance to write a paper, didn't matter if it was English class, history class, sociology, whatever. Every paper I wrote was some kind of an explanation of why the school system is terrible and horrible and wrong. And I was just at war with the world. And I had this one memory when I was drinking. I was living in Greensboro at the time. It was sometime in 1999, and I just gotten off work. I worked weekends, so it was early Monday morning, and I was chugging a 40. It's my second one, and I had enough there that I knew I was going to get the job done. And I'm chugging that thing, and that warm feeling's coming along, And at that moment, I'm like, this is it. This is the feeling that I like. And at that moment, I knew that the world sucked, I sucked, we're all alone. Deep down inside, I knew that fundamentally all I'm doing is getting a temporary escape from a horrible, horrible existence where no one loves each other, no one cares about each other. We're all alone ultimately, and then you die. And that was my reality. And today, and I've had some really, really rough things happen to me in recovery. I've had people die. I've had people close to me commit suicide. I've been laid off from my job, all kinds of different things. But even when I'm having a really, really tough day, I've shown up half an hour late for a speaking engagement. But no matter what's going on, I know that if I'm having a frustration, I'm having a hard time, I'm having grief, I'm doing so in a world that is fundamentally good, where in the core of my being, I know that we're all in this together. And that's just the opposite of what my experience was, not just when I was drinking, but before I started drinking. And I started drinking because that was already my reality. It just exaggerated it as I started cherry-picking evidence to prove how terrible the world was in order to justify my drinking. Again, I didn't know at the time that's what I was doing, but really that was my life. And today, I can't believe how wonderful my life is and how much I see God at work in the world and how much I see human beings caring for one another. And I know it's not just in Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm able to actually see goodness in human nature, which absolutely did not exist for me before. But I learned the knack of seeing it, of seeing that I like to call them little God cookies, those little moments which is of connection and goodness that they didn't exist for me before. And I learned how to recognize those things in Alcoholics Anonymous through working these steps and hanging around people like you and just feeling the love. And I'm grateful I got to be here and for a few minutes, and I'm sorry that I was late and I went over, but it's wonderful to be invited, and thank you for asking me.